The sky held a deep darkness, visibility non-existent. Upon receiving the signal, 2 subdued shots were fired, causing 2 guards to collapse. Shots continued for the next 15 minutes. Once everything fell silent, the radio echoed. The building cleared, ready for evacuation. 14 years later, I found myself by the hotel room window, gazing at the sunset, reminiscing about how it all began and reflecting on how I ended up here, sipping my vodka. The liquid burned as I swallowed, mirroring the memories of the past several weeks. Nevertheless, I held on to the hope that all was not lost. You see, 6 weeks ago, I stumbled upon the discovery that my wife of the past 12 years was having an affair. The revelation occurred by accident. But isn't that how most clueless husbands find out? By the way, I'm Logan. Jamie and I met during our junior year in college, dated until graduation. I joined the Marine Corps, and she embarked on a job search. Back then, I loved her, but didn't want her to marry me while I was stationed in who knows where. It seemed unfair to her. So, 5 years later, after completing my Marine service, I returned home and within a few weeks secured a good job with a large company in their sales group. It turned out my boss was also a Marine and had a preference for hiring former military types due to our disciplined work ethic. I excelled in my job, making a name for myself. During this period, I decided to re-enter the dating scene, exploring online sites. To my pleasant surprise, I found my college sweetheart Jamie on one of them. God, she looks good in those pictures. Now, Jamie may not have supermodel looks, but she possesses a body. In college, she pursued modern dance, prioritizing staying in shape. And what a shape she has. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with legs reminiscent of a dancer, she is not overly muscular but curvy, boasting an amazing figure. Her long, flowing, rich brown hair frames her face, accompanied by those dark brown eyes and a smile that melts my heart every time I see it. She exudes that girl-next-door look, sweet and innocent, with just enough amativeness thrown in for good measure. I signed up as quickly as possible and contacted her immediately. It wasn't until a week later that she responded, questioning where the hell I had been and why I hadn't called or emailed her over the last 5 years. If she was this upset at me for not contacting her during my Marine service, then she must have missed me. This was a very positive sign. Soon, we were dating and essentially picking up where we had left off in college. Within a year, we were married, and a year later, we welcomed our first child, Rebecca. My job was progressing well, even though I found myself traveling more, which was anticipated. 2 years later, our second daughter, Amy, came into the picture. Since then, I've been promoted, and we now reside in a lovely house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. While I still travel quite a bit, sometimes for 2 weeks each month, it's a necessity for my job. It wasn't until a few years later that Jamie began questioning when I would reduce my travel. She missed my presence and felt safer when I was home. I explained that it was a necessary part of my job, assuring her that it wouldn't be much longer before I would be promoted to the next level, reducing my travel significantly and allowing me to be home more often. She reluctantly accepted this, but wasn't thrilled to see me go on my next trip. Looking back, I should have realized there was trouble brewing, but I fully loved and trusted my wife, making me blind to the initial signs of a problem. The first clue was our arguments over trivial matters. Upon my return home, she would blame me for things unrelated to me. If you were home more, this wouldn't happen, or we need you here, not gallivanting all over the country. She had a valid point, though it took me a while to realize it. The second clue surfaced when I found some of her new lingerie in the laundry. While searching for a shirt, I came across silk underwear and a matching silk top. My wife typically has simple tastes, opting for a t-shirt and shorts or sweatpants for bedtime. The only time I'd bought her something from Victoria's Secret, she wore it just once and never again. However, the lingerie I found was unfamiliar, and I assumed she bought it for herself. The third clue was the decline in our bed activity. Our once passionate and romantic encounters dwindled, with her offering various excuses. Exhausted myself, it didn't initially seem problematic, and I believed things would return to normal once my travel reduced. I refrained from pushing her, aware that pressing the issue would worsen an already challenging situation. The final blow was devastating when first revealed, and I was hesitant to accept it. A mutual friend saw Jamie with someone at a farmer's market 40 miles away from our home. Initially thinking it was me, he observed them holding hands, laughing, touching, and kissing. When he approached, he realized it wasn't me. Sensing something amiss, he discreetly walked away, following them for a while until they drove off in a car. I still remember that call. My cell buzzed as I was leaving a meeting. Frank called me and informed me that he had something important to discuss. I told him I was in between meetings and couldn't talk, suggesting we could talk later. Frank agreed and asked me to call him at the earliest opportunity, expressing some concern in his voice. I assured him that I would and asked if the matter was urgent, to which he replied that it could wait. I hung up, not dwelling on the call, assuming Frank would have informed me if it were urgent. Later that evening, I returned Frank's call. I inquired about the reason for his call and what was so important. Frank hesitated before revealing that he had seen my wife out with another man earlier that day. I asked if she was with a friend, feeling a sense of nervousness. Frank struggled to convey the difficult news, stating that they appeared to be a couple, holding hands, laughing, and kissing. He apologized for being the bearer of such news and suggested that my wife might be having an affair. Those words hit me so hard that I was left feeling numb. What made him think that? We were happily married, and she had no reason to. I couldn't complete the thought. Clues I had noticed earlier suddenly made sense, yet I resisted believing it. Frank brought me back, expressing that he knew it was hard, but I needed to be aware. He suggested there might still be hope to save my marriage and offered his support, telling me to let him know if I needed anything. I acknowledged and thanked him before hanging up, sitting on the bed and grappling with the reality or potential cruel joke. As I pondered, anger intensified at the thought of my wife cheating. During the flight home, I began to cool down and think more clearly about what needed to be done. Without solid evidence, I didn't know where to start. Upon landing, my first call was to Frank, seeking details about the man she was with. Protecting my daughters from our issues was crucial. I wanted to salvage our marriage. Frank advised me not to do anything I would regret and shared that he had a friend who went through a similar situation. He suggested I talk to him for insight on handling the situation, emphasizing the importance of avoiding trouble or making things worse. Frank's advice resonated, and I realized I needed guidance from someone who had faced a similar situation. Right now, the best course of action is to head home and act like everything is normal. If she suspects you're onto something, it'll be tougher to gather evidence against her. I hope I'm mistaken, but I'm certain about what I witnessed that day. Frank was correct. Upon reaching home, I managed to compose myself enough to behave normally around Jamie and the girls. It wasn't a walk in the park, but I somehow pulled it off. In the following days, I searched the house for any clues of her affair, but nothing stood out. Yet, a nagging feeling persisted that I might be overlooking something. Frank called, suggesting I talk to his friend. I agreed to meet them at a bar across town the next day after work, keeping it from Jamie by mentioning late meetings. In the dive bar, I found Frank and his friend Mark in a back booth nursing beers. Frank looked up as I sat down. Mark greeted me as the friend Frank had mentioned. We exchanged greetings, though neither seemed thrilled to be there. Mark spoke, having been briefed by Frank on my situation. He empathized with my feelings but warned against making the same mistakes he did, sharing his painful experience of revenge. It led to a 5-year prison term and losing everything in the divorce and lawsuit against his wife and her boss. He cautioned me against doing anything foolish, his gaze intense. I simply nodded. Curious about alternative approaches, I inquired about what he would have done differently. Mark admitted he'd still go after the boss, but in a subtler manner to catch him off guard. He expressed deep contempt for the man who stole his wife. As for his wife, knowing what he knows now, he'd have opted for a divorce. Our conversation then delved into the do's and don'ts of my situation. The initial step was to secure damning evidence of my wife's infidelity to prevent any denial when confronting her. The second step involved consulting a divorce lawyer to understand how to protect assets and determine my rights in this situation. The third was to keep a substantial amount of cash on hand in case she discovered my actions and froze accounts and credit cards. Lastly, securing a small apartment or alternative living arrangements was crucial in case I decided to leave, ensuring I had a place to stay. While these suggestions were sound, I initially believed I could resolve the issue through conversation. However, as soon as I mentioned this, Mark pounded his fist on the table. Mark emphasized the importance of not doing anything stupid, pointing out that her new boyfriend might be filling her head with tales. He suggested that before approaching my wife, I needed to understand what she had been told and what she believed. Mark drew parallels to my military background as a Marine, highlighting the significance of good intel in battle. He stressed the need for a plan of attack and a strategy for when things go sideways, emphasizing the importance of knowing which way is forward. His question about my military service caught me off guard, and I confirmed that I was a Marine. I questioned the relevance, and Mark continued to stress the importance of having a plan and strategy, drawing connections to my current situation. I sighed, struggling to accept the possibility of my seemingly happy marriage coming to this. Mark apologized quietly, and we sat in silence until Frank broke it, asking about my plan and how I wanted to handle the situation. Realizing the necessity, I expressed my desire to salvage my marriage if possible. But more than anything, I wanted the other man to suffer without risking my own freedom. I made it clear that obtaining proof and intel on my adversary was a priority. Mark smiled at my last comment. He advised against hiring a private investigator, citing his own costly and unproductive experience. With access to her bank, credit card accounts, and phone records, he suggested checking for unusual purchases or calls. Additionally, exploring the possibility of a second cell phone and setting up hidden video cameras around the house for both visual and audio recording. Despite the discomfort, I agreed, determined to make him pay. Our conversation continued for another hour, during which I mentally noted the suggestions offered. Mark's advice emphasized the importance of not discussing the situation at work until I identified my wife's potential lover, considering the risk that someone familiar with my schedule might catch on. He also mentioned he would have approached his wife's lover more subtly, sparking my determination to devise a plan to outsmart this person. However, I needed more information and assistance. The next workday, I scrutinized my upcoming travel plans for the next month, discovering a 2-day trip. Concerned about someone at work knowing my schedule, I discreetly spoke with my boss, suggesting I might extend the client visit to a whole week. He approved the idea without hesitation. The subsequent step involved creating the illusion of being away while secretly returning. Using a prepaid debit card with cash, I purchased a return ticket on another airline. Online, I acquired several spy cameras and a regular camera with a powerful zoom and good low-light capabilities. This constituted the first part of my plan to uncover the identity of this person. The second part aimed to capture them in the act on video, eliminating any doubt of her infidelity. My day was dedicated to meticulous plotting and planning, a skill at which I excel. However, the crucial missing piece of information was the identity of the man involved. Until that was resolved, I couldn't trust anyone, not even my best friend and boss, Hal. Recognizing it would take time to unveil this person's name, I remained determined. By week's end, all the ordered items had been delivered to Frank's home. Now, I just needed the opportunity to discreetly install the spy cameras around my house. With Jamie's Saturday shopping routine with her girls and mother, the house would be empty. After several hours, all the cameras were in place and tested. I could even monitor them in real time from my tablet or laptop over the internet and observe what was happening. With the cameras installed, I proceeded to search the house for clues. Initially, I checked the credit card bills for any unusual charges, followed by an inspection of her closets to see if she had purchased any new, more revealing or shapely clothes. While my search didn't yield concrete evidence, I came across a few newer items, including a very short red dress I had never seen her wear before. The idea of her wearing it for anyone but me troubled me. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the red dress represented a departure from her usual attire, driving me to the point of needing time to think. I opted for a 5-mile jog in my running shorts and shoes, a long run that typically calmed my mind and provided clarity upon my return. As I arrived home, spotting Jamie's car in the driveway, I knew my daughters, whom I affectionately called my angels, were home. Their voices and laughter as I walked in never failed to bring a smile to my face. Calling out to Jamie, I was joyfully greeted by my girls running from the family room to share their day. Jamie emerged from the kitchen, inquiring about my run and kissing me on the cheek before shooing the girls away. After dinner preparations consisting of pork chops, I enjoyed a shower and our evening meal, followed by putting our girls to bed. In the family room, we watched TV, though my preoccupation with thoughts of Jamie's actions during my trips rendered me oblivious to the screen. Feeling overwhelmed, I announced an early bedtime, retreating to our bedroom. In the bedroom, noticing Jamie's purse on the hope chest, I took a chance and searched for clues. To my dismay, I discovered a cheap cell phone previously unknown to me. Turning it on, I recorded the number and reviewed the call log, finding only one unfamiliar number, which I also noted before powering off the phone. This newfound evidence compelled me to finally accept the fact that she was having an affair. Heartbroken and consumed with a desire for revenge, I remembered Mark's advice not to act impulsively and resolved to be patient. Quickly changing, I went to bed, pretending to be asleep when Jamie eventually joined me, avoiding conversation to prevent unintentional revelations. The next few days were challenging, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy after uncovering damning proof. As the morning of another business trip approached, I went through my usual routine, packing my bags into the car. Just before heading out, I casually asked Jamie if she had anything special planned during my absence, receiving a strange look as she mentioned the usual routine. Racing through possible explanations in my mind, I bid a quick goodbye and drove to the airport, wondering if the cameras in our house would capture her with the person involved. Despite hoping for her decency to refrain from bringing him into our bed, I became increasingly certain that, before all this, she would never have cheated on me. In the following days, concluding my work with the particular client in record time, I packed up, preparing to return home. That evening, I monitored the video feeds from the cameras but found nothing unusual. Consequently, I opted to review earlier recordings. The system initiated recording when someone entered the camera-equipped room, storing all footage centrally, accessible remotely. As I fast-forwarded through that day's recordings, I discovered a moment when Jamie was on her secret cell phone. I stopped and reversed the video to observe her answering the phone, then played it at normal speed. The audio quality was poor, but I heard enough. She was speaking to someone, referring to them as baby. They discussed my absence for the week and the logistics of meeting discreetly at a motel. Despite my urge to hear the rest, she laughed and turned her back to the camera, making it impossible for me to catch the entire conversation. When she turned back, she continued, instructing the person to park down the street at a coffee shop a few blocks away. "Okay, baby, I can't wait. I'll see you tomorrow night." I couldn't believe what I just heard. He was going to be in my house and our bed. Thoughts of disposing of his body crossed my mind, but Mark's warning echoed, urging me not to do anything rash. Suppressing my anger, I resolved to wait for the right moment, though the strain was becoming unbearable. My wife, the love of my life, and the mother of our 2 children, was betraying me. Why was she doing this? What had driven her into the arms of another man? The flight back home was too quick. I wasn't ready for what awaited me. So I checked into a hotel, contemplating my next move. I knew tonight was the night he was coming to my house, and I wanted to see him with my own eyes. Was he someone I knew, or someone from work? That much I needed to know to help me decide how to proceed. With no idea of what time he'd arrive, I knew he was going to park at the coffee shop down the street, so I waited there, even though I had no idea what he looked like. To be safe, I rented a car at the airport, finding a spot with a good view of the parking lot. I brought my camera, checking the zoom quality. I could be at least 100 yards away and get a close-up view of his face and license plate. Around 9 p.m., a silver BMW M3 pulled into the parking lot. I began taking pictures, and thankfully the lighting was good, giving me a clear view of his face. It was no one I recognized. He parked on the other side of the lot, away from the coffee shop, then started walking towards my house. I took a deep breath to control my rage while sitting there. I accessed the Wi-Fi from the coffee shop, viewing the cameras in my house. After several minutes, I saw him enter and passionately kiss my wife. Suppressing my fury, I listened to their conversation. He expressed his thoughts about her all day, and they discussed having the house to themselves until the next morning, since she had sent the kids over to her parents for the night, and I wouldn't be back until Friday. How considerate that she sent the kids away. I observed as he started undressing my wife right in our living room. She reciprocated, and in just a few short minutes, They were undressed, with their hands all over each other. She suggested taking it up to the bedroom, and they both ran out of sight of the camera towards the stairs. As I listened to their laughter, leaving their clothes spread around the floor, I realized I needed to act. Lucky for me, I got out of my car and walked quickly down to my house. The front door was left unlocked as they hurried upstairs, making things easier for me. I went straight for his pants, discovering his wallet with all the needed information and a little extra. With his wallet in hand, I headed to my home office on the first floor, opposite our bedroom, minimizing the risk of being hurt. Switching on my computer and the printer scanner, I waited for them to power up. Once ready, I began scanning items from Stephen Bannister's wallet, copying his driver's license and other details. After returning the wallet, I took pictures of their scattered clothes and started recording what I was witnessing with the camera's video feature, quietly ascending the stairs. As I reached the top, faint sounds of their lovemaking reached me, turning my stomach. The bedroom door was wide open, and they believed they had the house to themselves. Slowly, I made my way toward the bedroom. With their voices getting louder, I found myself in the doorway, observing Steve on his back, undressed, with my wife on top in the classic 69 position, pleasing each other. They were so engrossed that I managed a few steps into the room unnoticed. Aware that the hidden cameras didn't offer the best definition, I desired high-definition footage. I recorded several minutes before resisting the urge to grab a baseball bat and attack him. Mark's wise words echoed in my mind, "Don't do anything stupid." So I backed out slowly and left the house. Driving back to the hotel, my mind was a mess, and the hate I felt was at an all-time high. I couldn't remember being this mad, and it was starting to scare me. I called Frank, sharing what I had done and the information obtained. Frank acknowledged my actions, but expressed concern about the risk of being in the house again. He apologized for the situation and offered any help he could provide. I thanked him and mentioned my need to talk with someone and my intention to ask Mark for a favor. Frank agreed to arrange a meeting with Mark over the weekend, as Mark had expressed a willingness to help. After the conversation with Frank, I attempted to sleep without success. I decided to clear my mind and work off the rage with my usual morning run. However, it did little to ease my emotions. Following the run, I took a shower and then a long nap to cope with the lack of sleep from the previous night. Returning the rental car to the airport, I picked up my own car and headed straight to the office to check in and talk with Hal. I needed to reduce my work-related travel, and upon entering Hal's office, I closed the door and informed him about my situation. I mentioned my wife's desire for me to be home more and expressed the need for changes in my travel schedule. I looked at Hal, awaiting his response. Hal informed me that my promotion had been approved and I wouldn't have to travel as frequently anymore. It was a welcomed relief, although I couldn't fully grasp it at the moment. My mind was consumed by the knowledge of my wife's affair. Hal noticed my distraction and expressed concern about my recent behavior. I felt compelled to confide in him about what I had discovered. I told him about catching my wife with her lover and recording them together. Hal reacted with shock and sympathy, offering his support. I explained that I needed to be home more to salvage my marriage, and I asked him to keep the situation confidential, fearing someone in the office might be involved in leaking information about my schedule. Hal agreed to cover for me if I needed time off to gather evidence against my wife. I expressed my desire to confront her with undeniable proof to either salvage the marriage or protect myself in a divorce. Hal nodded in agreement, promising his assistance and discretion. After thanking Hal, I left his office feeling a bit relieved that things were falling into place, even though deep down, I knew my marriage was beyond repair. I went home that night and tried my best to act normal. My girls attacked me as I walked through the door, and I had to keep from crying, thinking how they would be affected if a divorce were to happen. I didn't like the idea of having to get permission to visit my own children. I have to get the custody of my kids. On Saturday, while my wife and kids were out shopping, I met with Mark and Frank at a diner. I updated them on the progress I'd made in gathering information. Mark remarked on my courage and expressed surprise that I hadn't taken more drastic action. He then asked how he could assist me, mentioning Frank's mention of my time spent in prison. Both Frank and Mark regarded me with curiosity. For the next hour, I explained my plan and outlined what I hoped to achieve with Mark's connections. When I finished, Mark smiled and expressed admiration for the plan. He mentioned knowing someone who could potentially assist me and suggested they might be able to recommend others, though he cautioned that they would likely expect payment. Mark agreed to make some calls to his contacts. I handed him my cell number and asked him to contact me once he had spoken with his friends so we could arrange a meeting to finalize the details. After discussing a few more ideas, I planned to implement them as soon as possible. I realized I needed to make some additional online purchases to prepare for the next phase of my plan. The rest of the weekend went the way most weekends go, with one noticeable difference. Sunday night. My wife and I usually make love that night. This time she wasn't feeling well. It wasn't the first time this happened, so it was not surprising. But it had been over a month since the last time we were close. My next trip was coming up, and I asked Hal for the following week off. But if anyone called the office, they were to be told I was on a normal business trip. He had no problem with that and wished me luck. So now I had to let my wife know my next trip was going to be longer. She was not happy, but that was to be expected. I reassured my wife that my frequent traveling would soon come to an end, and that I would be home more often. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked that I would be around so much she'd get tired of me. However, she didn't respond with a smile. Instead, she sighed and told me to call her when I arrived at my destination. Her demeanor was distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. I rushed out the door before I said something I'd regret and drove to the airport again. The meetings with these clients went very well, and a deal was reached early, so I was able to fly back a day sooner. I kept checking the cameras during the week, but he didn't reappear at my house. But I did see her on that secret cell phone of hers, so I listened to her conversation, and I knew this was the opportunity one was looking for, even though it smacked me to hear what she was planning on doing. I went to the office and found the items that I had ordered waiting for me. Knowing my wife's normal routine, I could easily set up one of these items that I got with little chance of being caught. She went to the gym 4 times a week, and I knew where and when, so I had her spare car keys and was able to place the item where she wouldn't find it. Next, I went to Steven's condo to see if he was there. I saw his car parked in the carport, so I assumed he was home. I brought my camera and was checking if I could see him inside. I got very lucky as I saw him through his sliding doors and that he wasn't alone. He was with another woman, and they seemed to be romantically connected as they were kissing and touching each other as a loving couple. This was too good to be true, as I took a video of their affection for each other. When I saw them leaving together, I followed at a safe distance. They went for lunch, and this gave me a chance to place the other item on his car. This was a little more difficult and dangerous if someone saw me, but I was able to do it without being caught. Now all I needed to do was wait. That was the hardest thing for me to do. I received a call from Mark, who informed me that he had a friend who could assist with my plan. We decided to meet in my hotel room to avoid being seen together in public, considering the nature of the activities we were planning. When they arrived, Mark introduced me to Joe, a computer hacker who could help with our scheme. Over the next hour, I recounted the details of my wife's affair and expressed my desire for revenge against her lover. I showed them copies of the contents of the man's wallet that I had obtained. Joe raised concerns about the legality of our plan and demanded to know what was in it for him. After considering for a moment, I offered Joe $5,000 in cash. He agreed to the terms, but insisted on receiving half of the payment up front and the remainder upon completion of the job. We discussed the need to gain access to the man's condo to access his computer and gather additional evidence against my wife. With the intel I had on Steven, Joe used my laptop to review his recent purchases. What stood out were the 2 airline tickets to Las Vegas and a hotel reservation for 5 nights. This signaled our decision to break into his condo, prompting Joe to ask if he knew whether there was an alarm system. I admitted uncertainty, so Joe agreed to investigate and get back to me. If an alarm system was present, he insisted on an increased payment for facilitating our entry. I agreed to pay him more, contingent on justification. It appeared my wife was planning a final trip with this individual. I checked my tablet to confirm the functionality of the tracking devices I placed in their cars, accessible via my tablet or smartphone, to monitor their locations. Additionally, I examined home video cameras, confirming she had packed a small carry-on bag for the trip. The day arrived, and I monitored their progress from my hotel room. I called Joe and he agreed to meet later that afternoon. While he hadn't identified any visible alarm systems, he emphasized the need for caution. We met a few blocks from Steven's condo and discussed the plan for gaining entry. Joe, drawing on his prison experience, possessed the skill of lockpicking. It was just after sunset, and the growing darkness would help maintain discretion. Joe, with his laptop in a messenger bag and my camera at the front door of Steven's condo, immediately knelt down and worked on the locks for almost a minute. Soon, the door was open, and we entered, first checking for any signs of an alarm system. Satisfied that none existed, we proceeded to locate Steven's computer. Fortunately, it was openly accessible, allowing Joe to carry out his tasks. I interrupted, saying, "Wait," as I slowly recorded a video of the room's layout. "I want to ensure we leave everything as we found it." Joe nodded in agreement, acknowledging the importance of leaving no traces behind. He resumed his work as I explored for potential incriminating evidence. Browsing through his mail, including bank statements and credit card bills, I ventured into his bedroom, capturing video footage. The remarkable cleanliness and high-end furniture suggested affluence, leaving me still uncertain about his profession. Joe's exclamation of "pay dirt" brought me back to the living room. He successfully accessed Steven's online bill payments, discovering checks and extra credit cards. I was pleased, having brought a card reader to record information from the magnetic strip. Joe proposed making copies for online purchases, potentially maxing out his cards in a few hours. Joe grinned and inquired if it was possible to empty out the man's bank account. I confirmed that it could be done, intending to carry out the transaction from the man's computer to make it seem legitimate. Joe mentioned the possibility of the bank calling to verify the transaction, but assured me that no password was necessary, as I had already copied the man's social security number from his wallet. I chuckled at the man's carelessness and gave Joe the go-ahead to proceed. Expressing my desire to inflict maximum damage on the man, I suggested emptying his bank account immediately and sabotaging his credit cards on the day of his return from Las Vegas. Joe enthusiastically agreed, referring to it as a fitting homecoming gift. He emphasized the importance of covering our tracks to avoid any repercussions. I reassured him that I was taking precautions to avoid detection, pointing out the latex gloves we were wearing as evidence of our caution. I went back to search through his bedroom and didn't find much until I looked in the back of his closet. I found a shoebox with several recordable DVR discs. They were labeled with the names of women. As I pulled out the box, I dumped it on his bed and started to sort through them. I didn't recognize any of the names until I saw Jamie's. That idiot had recorded the two of them together. But why? Joe called me over to the other room to show me something he had found. He explained that the man we were targeting was involved in blackmail, possessing numerous videos of women with Steven. These videos showed the women's faces clearly, but Steven's face wasn't always visible due to the camera angles. Some emails indicated that the women were being extorted for money, with threats of using the videos against them in court. Joe speculated that Steven preyed on married women with children, exploiting their vulnerabilities for his gain. Seeking retaliation, I asked Joe if Steven kept all the videos on his hard drive. Joe replied that he wasn't certain, but suggested that the DVDs found in the closet might contain the only copies. I decided to gather the DVDs and search for a backup drive, but couldn't find one. Returning to Joe, I learned that he had located the backup drive. After instructing Joe to do a full backup and wipe the laptop's drive, I explained our plan to bankrupt Steven by ruining his blackmail scheme. I also expressed my desire to inform the women involved that they were no longer under threat. I asked Joe to print out all relevant emails so I could set up an email account to communicate with them. He offered to set up the account from Steven's computer, and I agreed to the idea. After wrapping things up, I did one last sweep of the place before we locked up and departed swiftly. Back at the cars, I gave Joe an envelope containing the remainder of his payment, expressing my gratitude for his assistance. We shook hands, and he assured me he'd be ready to carry out the next phase of our plan when needed. With that, he drove off, and I returned to my hotel to continue implementing my scheme. I called my in-laws to check on my children. My father-in-law answered, and I greeted him cheerfully, inquiring about the kids and expressing my hope that they weren't causing any trouble. He reassured me that the children were behaving well and mentioned Jamie's weekend trip with her friends. I feigned ignorance and said I hadn't spoken with her yet, emphasizing that I wanted to ensure the kids were settled before contacting her. After our conversation, it was evident that Jamie's father had no knowledge of her affair in Las Vegas. It further solidified my disdain for her actions. My next call was to the house, which I knew she wouldn't be there, so I left a message. Then I waited an hour, and when she didn't call me back, I called her cell again. She didn't pick up, so I left a message saying I was worried that I had called the house and you didn't answer or called me back, and now you don't answer your cell. Please call me just so I know you're okay. I also added that if I didn't hear from her within the hour, I was going to call her parents. 15 minutes later, I received a surprise call from Jamie. She asked if everything was all right, mentioning that she had tried calling the house but received no answer. I assured her that everything was fine, explaining that I had taken the girls to my parents' house after spending time with friends. Jamie's response sounded somewhat tense. I suggested we have a night out together once I returned home in a week, but her response seemed uncertain. Feeling suspicious, I pressed Jamie, teasing her and attempting to make her nervous. She claimed to be tired and hinted at wanting to end the conversation. Respecting her wishes, I bid her good night and expressed my love before ending the call. Despite my efforts to remain calm, anger began to resurface within me. I didn't sleep well, and so I was up early doing my morning run. I got back to my hotel room and took a nice long shower. Afterward, I called the office and checked if anything needed my attention, but all seemed to be going smoothly there. Then I got the call. Every parent fears Rebecca was injured at school and had to be taken to the hospital. At that moment, nothing mattered to me more than the safety of my child. The school called my house first. When no one answered, they tried to call me at work, which in turn, someone from my office called me. I called the school back, and they informed me she had broken her arm and was at the emergency room being treated. I rushed out the door and went straight to the hospital. Once there, I called Jamie's cell, and when I got her voicemail, screamed into the phone that if she didn't call me within the next 15 minutes, the next call I make is to a divorce lawyer. It was an hour later that my cell rang. I saw it was from Jamie. I rejected the call and sat with my daughter as the doctor set her arm in a cast. She was crying, saying she wanted mommy. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. It took some time, but she finally settled down, and I took her to her grandparents. My phone rang again, and again I rejected. When I had calmed down, I made a call to a good divorce lawyer and set up an appointment for the following day. Then Jamie called again. I took this call. She greeted me sarcastically, commenting on my supposed luck at the blackjack tables and informing me that she had contacted a divorce lawyer. Through tears, she threatened to use the videos she had of me and Stephen together as evidence to gain full custody of our children. I reminded her of her absence when our child was in the hospital, crying for her mother while she was with her lover in Las Vegas. Attempting to reassure her, I suggested that she could start a new life with Stephen and potentially have more children. She insisted that it was me she loved and wanted. Feeling conflicted, I ended the call, unable to bear the emotional turmoil. I took Rebecca and Amy home and helped them pack their bags with some clothes and brought them to my hotel and got them their own room next to mine. Then I called Jamie's father and told him what happened at school and that for the time being, we won't be living at home until some things can be resolved. My father-in-law called and asked about the situation between Jamie and me. I explained that we were having some problems, but suggested he speak with Jamie for more details. He informed me that he would be taking care of the girls for the time being until he was sure of their well-being and safety. Although he didn't fully understand, he wished us the best and hoped we could resolve our issues. I then contacted my lawyer and instructed him to proceed with serving my wife. Next, I called Mark and instructed him to wreak havoc on Stephen by maxing out his credit cards, emptying his bank accounts, and damaging his credit. Later that night, Jamie called me in distress. Initially hesitant to answer, I eventually did after receiving a text from her. She tearfully explained that Stephen was blackmailing her, threatening to share videos of them from Vegas with others. I responded coldly, suggesting that she had brought this upon herself by engaging in the affair. I hung up, knowing that Jamie needed to face the consequences of her actions. She had chosen to leave her home and marriage for her own pleasure, and now she would have to face the repercussions. After deciding to end things with Jamie, I needed to address her lover, Stephen. I called Mark and informed him that I had contacted my lawyer to have Jamie served with divorce papers, which would take a few days. Meanwhile, I wanted to move my money offshore, ensuring that only my funds were protected. Mark questioned my decision, but I assured him that I was done with Jamie and was determined to give her what she deserved. Mark mentioned a change in plans and suggested meeting at 5. We convened at a dive bar and engaged in a lengthy conversation that lasted almost 2 hours. Before parting ways, we shook hands and I handed him a substantial envelope. For the next 3 days, Jamie kept calling, and I kept ignoring. I wanted her to suffer. Friday evening, I got the call I was eagerly waiting for. It was a video call. I answered on the other end. There was a man tied to a chair and all bloodied. A voice in the background informed Stephen that his friend had a message for him. Stephen, looking at the screen, was addressed by someone who mentioned his recent trip to Tijuana and the exhaustion that must come with it. The speaker hinted at Stephen's financial troubles and suggested that his current situation would help him hide from the bank. The speaker continued, mentioning someone named Santiago and his special stew, hinting at a sinister implication. They explained that they could have pursued legal action against Stephen for alienation of affection, but opted not to waste their time. The message concluded with a farewell to Stephen, indicating that someone named Mr. Lopez was now involved. I saw Stephen for the last time that day. In his eyes, I saw fear. That is what I call a good investment. Stephen was still alive when he was lowered into the giant blue drum filled with Santiago's special mix. No one ever heard from him again. No one even asked about him. 7 months later, I was a free man. I got the custody of my daughters. I get to keep the house till both my daughters are 19, and then we can sell and split the difference. There was no alimony or child support. I wanted nothing to do with Jamie, but she has visitation rights, and I usually drop the daughters at her place and drive away. A year later, I started dating Lisa. She was previously Amy's schoolteacher, and it seems that Amy likes her company more than her mother. I have not decided on getting married, and I'm taking this slowly.